This is the Dr. Deborah Show, and this is the show where we talk about bringing peace and calm into your life. Later in the show, we're going to be talking about mental health stigma. We're live at KCSB FM Santa Barbara, 91.9. KCSB is a platform for cultural expression and thoughtful discussion, providing a diverse educational forum. I'm a Santa Barbara-based clinical psychologist, and I specialize in pediatric neuropsychology. And during my clinical training and my current work, I've treated thousands of people. And I want to share my experiences and information with you. I'm also a UCSB alumni, and I live locally in Santa Barbara. And this show is all about our community and how to create compassionate conversations about our well-being and health. Again, I want to welcome our listeners to the Dr. Deborah Show. It's wonderful to have you with us. And as a reminder, the show is psychoeducational, and it's in the area of neuropsychology and well-being. And it's not meant to replace professional mental health advice or therapy. So if you do believe you suffer from a particular disorder, please do reach out for professional help. Today on the show, we'll be talking about mental health and well-being with a focus on teen suicide with our very special guest, Jason Reid. Jason Reid, or Jay, lost his 14-year-old son, Ryan, to suicide in 2018. His journey to understand why the signs were missed and to tell Ryan's story is the subject matter of the documentary movie Tell My Story, which is actually playing at the Santa Barbara Film Festival, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Jay is a successful entrepreneur and coach of CEOs. He's the father of 4, based in Murrieta, California. And following Ryan's death, Jay started a nonprofit to end teen suicide by 2030. The documentary is part of the strategy. He's also done 2 TED Talks, and this one soon after Ryan passed. There was a link actually that I was just referencing because if you're interested in seeing Jason's TED Talks, we'll have to give you some links. But his last name is Reid, and the talk is called "The Most Important Conversation You Will Have with Your Kids." Also, if you're interested, and I'll repeat it again, the movie called Tell My Story screens Friday at 10 a.m. and also Saturday at 2, which is free to the public. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you, Deborah. Great to be here.
I'm really excited for Jason to be here, and I'm really proud that he's here because I know it's a hard topic for us to talk about, but I think it's really critical for us to talk about teen suicide. What we'll be talking about is, I just briefly like to talk about mental health stigma, mental health and teen suicide, and then a bit about prevention awareness through understanding teen suicide. We're talking about mental health stigma today because mental health is the largest public health priority and the largest financial burden of any health issue in the world. And that's according to the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum. Also in a report called Attitudes Towards Mental Illness from the Centers for Disease Control, they found that stigma and embarrassment are 2 of the top reasons why people with mental health issues do not seek help or medication. I also just like to say that issues surrounding mental health affect people from all walks of life. I'm hoping someday we'll look at it more kind of like, if you have a hurt knee, you'd go see a doctor, you'd go get treatment for that. So hopefully we'll integrate mental health more into our overall health care. I'd like to also just briefly say what I think mental health is. I think of mental health as a physiological balance, meaning our heart's beating at a nice rate, our thoughts aren't too overwhelming, and our nervous system feels balanced. And that gives us a sense of inner peace, just to put it simply. I was wondering, Jason, how would you describe mental health?
Deborah, it's a great question and one that I've never been asked before. And
good.
So I am not a doctor. I am not an expert. I'm just a guy who spent the last couple of years trying to figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So how would I describe mental health?
And it's okay to feel emotional. I mean, this is a hard topic, That's why I was saying I was proud of you for coming on and talking about this, too.
Yeah, I'll be fun in a minute. I just got to get going.
I feel like Ryan is with us, though. You know what I mean? When I was writing my script, my printer wasn't working and I was trying to type something, and I like almost heard him say to me, "This is good. Keep doing this," So I think it's okay. Whatever you need to do.
I believe he's around all the time. But so how, what does mental health mean to me? Mm-hmm. I think it's that ability to just be in a good spot, to feel happy, to feel light, not to worry, not to be anxious. Mm-hmm. All those feelings are normal from time to time. They're not normal all the time.
Right.
And so when I think it's a balance of feeling good and feeling sad, but not feeling sad all the time.
Exactly. Well, that's what psychology really is like the tension of the opposites. So it's like, right. I feel so happy, but I can also feel really not like I want to be around, and how do we kind of hold that?
Yeah. But it's definitely something that I think you said it really well is, man, if we could get to the point where we, parents, and I was one of them, if your kid has a stomach ache, you're all over it. Like, oh my gosh.
And actually, stomach aches are a lot of times anxiety. I'm listening, sorry.
Yeah, no, they are. And it's like where, you have stomach ache, you have a fever. You're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Do I have to take you to the doctor? And so you're up all night with them. But we very rarely, or not enough, do we check into when they come home from school. They say, I'm just sad and I'm upset and I just don't feel it. Shake it off. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. We don't look at it the way we should. I didn't.
Well, and also I think our schools, it would be better if our schools were more involved, in that part of checking in with kids, because they're around kids a lot of the time.
Oh, I think that we're challenged as society because our schools are not equipped. Mm-hmm. Even though there's laws now in place that they have to be more equipped, mm-hmm. and some are more equipped than others.
You mean laws that for mental health?
Yeah, for mental health, in terms of having the right therapists, right access to mental health services for schools, talking about mental health, talking about teen suicide. There's things in place. I can't remember exactly the name of the law right now, but California is trying, but schools are having a hard time implementing. They don't always deal with it the right way when a suicide happens in a school. Sometimes they want to talk like it never happened at all.
Well, that's why I try to talk about suicide, because, even in the last, I had a guest on about a month ago. It was a 21-year-old student, because she wanted to interview me for the news here on suicide.
Sure.
And I said, why don't you come on? We'll have a conversation. And she did a beautiful job, because 3 of her friends committed suicide in the last 3 months on campus. But it's, even here, we just don't talk about, deaths that way. We just don't, for some reason. What do you think about that? Do you think that relates to our mental health too, that we don't talk about that?
Well, sure it does. When I did that, I've done 2 TED Talks. The first one that you saw, I tried to get that pushed across schools across the country. And I sent it out to superintendents and school districts, and a couple shared it with parents. Mm-hmm. And overwhelmingly, a lot of them said, we can't do that. We don't want to talk about it, because if you talk about suicide, there'll be more suicide.
Although what we were just talking about, and anybody who's listening, I've worked a lot around suicide. In 2004 and 2005, I worked for the county, and I worked for the mental health assessment team. So I'd be on call all night long, and I'm certified to 5150. And 5150 is when you take someone against their own will. Mm-hmm. But I got very comfortable actually helping people through suicidal situations and helping them not to turn to suicide. Of course, there were, I think 1 or 2 suicides in those couple of years. But, like we were talking about, there's a way to prevent it. And by talking about it, that actually decreases the likelihood someone will commit suicide. So it's the opposite of, I think somehow it's like one of those misnomers we got taught.
We're scared. People are scared.
What do you think they're scared of? Being seen as different, or?
I think parents are scared if they talk about it, they're going to put the thought in their kids' heads.
Right.
And I'm constantly saying, well, I'm sorry, the thought's already in their heads.
Exactly. It's kind of like a lot of other issues. It's actually better just to educate and do preventive medicine and start talking at a young age about that, I think, and versus, making it secretive.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting. I'm up here for the film festival all week through Sunday, and Sunday I fly up to Seattle because I was asked to speak to a group of parents. And this group was, it's elementary school parents and middle school parents. And we were putting this program together, and I'm like, well, I'm happy to do it as younger parents, but I'm sure they have their fears too. Mm-hmm. And so I was away last week. I did a call with the marketing team, called them up, said, okay, so what do you got, 30, 40 people signed up? They're like, no, it's 2 weeks out and we've sold out the event. All 265 seats are taken, and we've got a waiting list. I'm like, wow.
Good.
That speaks volumes
I
to
think
how parents are feeling.
There's a change. I know, well, maybe parents are panicking and saying, I need to actually face this instead of ignoring it. And that sounds like the school's supporting you too.
Yeah, I think I'm getting a lot of support, and not me. I think the movement
Right.
of us, all of us talking more about this is gaining traction. I mean, there's a lot of amazing people in this field.
Yeah.
There's a lot
You
of
met
amazing
other
people.
What do you mean when you say in this field?
Just trying their best to make a difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
To try and fight the stigma, get people to talk about it. I've talked to, parents around the world that have lost their kids. I've talked to people that are in the space professionally, like yourself, in the United States, that are just every day waking up and trying to make a difference. And it's hard. When you live in this space, it's hard.
It's actually, suicidal thoughts, I think, are actually more common than people realize.
Yeah.
I mean, I would guess in a given day, I saw many patients today before I got here. Probably a third of them have had suicidal thoughts. It doesn't mean they're going to act on them, but, they may have a feeling like a futility.
Well, and there's stats that say that teen kids these days, 27% of them have had thoughts of suicide in the last year. 40, 50% of them have anxiety that's off the charts that did not exist when I was growing up.
It's really healthy. I mean, actually, even as an impetus to this show, when I picked my son up, I wanted to honor your son and also the idea, like, what if he's got those thoughts? So we had a discussion even on the car ride home. And it was interesting because he was telling me about a couple different times where he was really upset with me that I actually didn't even know about, even though we talk about it. So even if you have ongoing discussions, there's always more information. So it's really, I think the critical piece is opening up a dialogue, and not being afraid of what your child might say to you and being afraid that you won't know what to do, because there are a lot of resources out, to help people.
There's a ton of resources. And I think, so my message is really simple. I've been a fairly successful guy. Thought I was a great dad. Wrote a book on parenting.
Yeah?
It's a funny book on parenting. So I took all these funny stories from the dinner table and wrote a book called Dinner Conversations.
Cute.
Ryan actually helped me write it.
Nice.
And the concept of the book is, hey, let's put away the phones, put away the computers, put away, and just sit at the dinner table for hours. But that's what my family did. That was our thing. Dinner was never 10 minutes. It was an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we talk about funny things, and they compete for the funny story that ended up on Facebook that night, and then we turned that into a book. So the irony of this is, I thought I was doing everything right. I thought I had a really good connection with my son. I travel a lot, I work a lot, but when I was home, I was with them. So I thought I had it all figured out.
I just think, don't you think suicide's more elusive for people?
Absolutely, but I didn't know.
Right, well, that's what I'm saying. It's more like, it's kind of like uncharted territory in a way.
But you see, I should have known.
How would you have known, though?
Well, because when I look back, I'm a guy who believes in the concept of extreme ownership. You know that book, Extreme Ownership?
Nope, I'll check that out, though, too.
Yeah, it's Jocko Wilkins, I think it is. I'm probably butchering his last name. Navy SEAL talks about you've got to own the stuff that goes on in your life.
Right.
So I have to take ownership for what happened to Ryan. And not that I wallow in misery saying this is all my fault, but if I don't look back on what happened and say, where could I have seen something different, then it's all in vain, right? Ryan died in vain. I have to be able to say, okay, for all of you who think you've got it all put together, like I thought I had it all put together.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. Here's the stuff I missed. So that's what when I'm talking, when I'm speaking, and when the movie's coming out, it's all about this to parents. My message to parents is, you need to pay more attention. You need to ask the right questions. You need to find the time to talk to your kids when they want to talk to you. Mm-hmm. Because the signs were there. Ryan was in his room more than he was out of his room. Right?
He was isolating. Mm-hmm.
He was isolating himself. I didn't think much of it. I had 4 grumpy kids. They were all teenagers, right? I'm going, because
your other kids go in their room too.
And he was, in my mind, the least grumpy of the 4 of them, right?
He's more easygoing personality.
He was more easygoing, but he was hiding it, right? And he spent way too much time on YouTube on his phone. He had great grades, so I didn't care.
I read that, yeah.
I'm figuring, well, you got straight A's, so okay. Right? Didn't spend a lot of time outside. He had Crohn's disease, so I thought, well, maybe he just doesn't want to be outside. Didn't spend a lot of time with his friends, but, he's online with his friends playing games. It's like I'm 52, you're 13. Maybe that's just the way it is these days. You guys don't go outside and play stuff, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's how it works. Okay. So, but that's not right. He was by himself. He was not going out as much. I'd say, hey, let's go do something. I don't want to do that.
He just didn't want to go do what he normally
I
used
didn't
to
want
do.
to do that. His behavior's changed. I mean, I was thinking about the other day because I was in his room. He used to be a guy who would get anytime he get $1, he'd spend it. And he'd buy stuff. And I used to give him a hard time. He just bought stuff all the time, right? So his money would go through his hands like water, which was fine because my kids would always work. They'd have money. They could do whatever they want with it. But then, like a year before, he stopped for some reason.
He stopped spending the money?
He stopped spending money. He just kept saving it all. He didn't want anything anymore.
He lost interest.
Interest.
They call that, actually, it's called anhedonia.
Oh, really?
It's spelled ANHEDONIA. It's kind of like, it's like one of the symptoms of depression where we lose interest in things we used to enjoy.
Yeah, and I saw that now looking back.
Now you made that connect, but then you maybe just kind of thought, like you said, your other siblings were doing that. And
well, I mean,
teenagers do spend a lot of time in their rooms.
Look, for every parent out there who's probably like me going, that happens to somebody else besides me. This kind of stuff doesn't happen in my family.
Actually, I think suicide's more common than people talk about. Because, I mean, as I sit and talk to people, maybe it's not in the immediate family. Maybe it's an uncle, or maybe it's grandfather or a sister. Or, I mean, it's surprising. I think people just hush about it.
But, yes, but then we all think it's going to happen not in our family nucleus.
Right. Well, actually, I have had a family member that that's one reason I'm very committed to talking about suicide, because I've had somebody that's a relative that had attempted suicide.
Yeah.
So I realized how important that is.
And good for you.
But I mean, it pushed me through, forced me. You got forced. It's just that person didn't pass away. But actually, one time I did save that person's life.
Yeah. Because
they came to my house and they had taken a whole bunch of pills, and I just intuitively thought that, and I called someone.
Yeah.
But it is really, really hard. And I wasn't a professional or anything then. It was very intuitive, actually, for me. But I think, obviously, most people don't rely on their intuition, you know what I mean, to make decisions.
Enough, yeah.
So, and if you're just coming on the show now, we're here exploring the relationship between mental health and teen suicide. Suicide rates are on a dramatic rise, both locally and globally. And like we're talking about, many suicidal individuals do not seek help or have resources available, even if they desire it. Now, I mean, in some communities, they do have a little bit more. I also just as part of my role and responsibility as a psychologist, I like to help dispel stigma and just talk briefly about stigma. I've kind of broken stigma down into two kind of sections, which is social stigma and self-stigma. And social stigma is when attitudes or discriminating behavior are directed toward an individual with a mental health problem as a result of the psychiatric label they may have been given. And self-stigma is when the person who has a mental health diagnosis, the sufferer, internalizes their perception of discrimination. And I think that's very, very common. For example, if we knew someone who was suicidal, and we thought, oh my gosh, I can't tell anybody, you know what I mean? That maybe, because I mean, there are kids that do talk about that to each other too.
Yeah, they do.
You know what I mean? But they don't talk to the parents about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is that if they have those feelings, they think, oh my gosh, but then that person had it. And I remember everybody was looking at that person. That's why we have to remove that veil over talking about challenging issues like suicide. And I think we need to take care of our mental health just by being able to discuss our emotions and our thoughts and feelings. So we're here talking about mental health and teen suicide. And Jason, I was wondering, can you explain teen suicide as far as how you think mental health may relate to that topic?
Sure. I think how here's what I've come to believe in the last, whatever it's been, 20 months, 21 months. And it comes from a lot of research, comes from talking to a whole bunch of parents, kids. We spoke to kids and parents for this movie that we did over the last year, with trying to get to how did we get here? And when I think about how we got here, I think about where I was when I grew up and how things are different. And if you take a look at my last TED Talk I did, you can find on my website, chooselife.org. is all about the idea that when I grew up, when none of this existed, right? There was 2 or 3 TV channels. And you come home from school, you watch TV, and then there's nothing else to watch. You'd fight with your brother and sister, and you'd get kicked outside, and then you'd be out till dinner time, right? We didn't have cell phones, we didn't have computers, we didn't know any of those things were.
Right.
I mean, I'm 52. The first video game that came out was Pong, and we thought it was amazing. Right?
I know. I spend a lot of time talking to the parents of kids I see about video games, and I'm like, well, I did go to the arcade. I mean, I grew up in San Luis Obispo, but I mean, there was really just like Pac-Man, and it was once a year. I think with the guy would come around with this little quarter thing, and I'm close to your age, so yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we did, right? And then you take it like here we are, you know, the anxiety levels that existed as a kid for me, they didn't. I mean, I know there were wars, there were problems, there were things going on. I'm sure there was when I was 12 years old. If you ask me what they are, even to this point, I don't know what they were. Why would I know?
Well, don't you think the pace of life was like a lot slower in the 70s? It was
totally slower. It's like, but there was, you know, all this stuff was going on. There were wars going on. But I mean, I didn't watch the evening news. I didn't read the paper. Whereas kids today, it's in their face, on their phone, true. CNN 24/7, blah, 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 right?
Do you think Ryan was looking at news? Or
he was absolutely looking at news.
Because you can see what he was looking at.
We'll get to the phone thing in a little bit, but the reality is that we would have conversations. And I thought it was great. Here's this 13-year-old kid who's completely well-read and wants to come down and have a conversation about global warming or the war in Iraq, right? And I'm going, wow, this is fun. Like, look how smart you are, right? But the reality is those kids today are worried about, will the planet be here in 20 years?
It's true. My son he's like, man, you guys have ruined the planet for us.
Yeah, and did I think about that? Not a chance.
Nope.
I was wondering how I was going to sneak around and get home late, or what the heck I was going to do.
Or go to the market and get a piece of gum or something.
Yeah, or something like that, right? And then here we are at UCSB. Well, let me go back one more step. I played hockey. We played ball. We played all the kind of stuff, right? But they think the pressure on kids today to be the best at the sport at 6 years of age.
Right. The pressure is so huge.
I mean, it's amazing how they practice 3, 4, 5 times a week in games all weekend long. And my gosh, I didn't make the travel team, so I'm a disaster and my life's over.
Right. It's a big burden.
Didn't exist.
I had a professional athlete. He played for the Celtics about a month and a half ago, and he was talking about that same idea of just like not every kid is going to be a professional athlete. I mean, and there's no need for that. Like, we don't need to put that kind of pressure on our kids. Because then they don't get time to come up for air. And we're trying
to be helpful parents, and then you take an education. I went to school. I didn't do my homework, I'm sure. I didn't have great grades, and I still somehow made it into a college.
Well, that's why I think the grade idea is not as critical. In fact, all the studies coming out now in the last 2 years are that your social emotional development, which I already did a lot of research on this too. I mean, those are the critical pieces. If you have those in place, you will get the good grades as well, but you also feel better about yourself.
Yeah, but you won't get into UCSB now unless you have a 4.0 or a 4.2.
Well, but maybe you go somewhere else, you know?
Absolutely.
Go to City College or, you know?
But if you look back 25 years ago, 27 years ago, when my business partners went to the school, and I know it well from back then, it's changed a lot, by the way.
Oh, I know. It has changed a lot.
I didn't know where to park. I knew nothing. But they didn't have a 4.1 or 4.2. They got a 3.2 or a 3.3 and they got into school.
It's super competitive now. I know the level of pressure these kids are. And then I see a lot of kids who actually are at, UCs or other Princeton, Stanford, and they're totally disillusioned. They're like, okay, I did all this. And most of it is, unfortunately, parent-driven because the parents are under pressure because they want them to get the good degree. But, sometimes, actually, I'm a big believer in City College. I mean, I started at UCSB. My dad didn't want to pay for me to probably stay at UCSB and then back to City College and then back to UCSB. So it doesn't, and I did all my GEs there.
I agree with you. But the challenge is when you add this all together and you say, there's their life now versus the life I grew up in.
Right, the comparing.
And my brain at that age at 12 is the same as their brain at 12. And my brain at 12, if you look back and you gave me all that extra pressure at 12, I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is amazingly hard.
Exactly.
They feel their lives are hard. And you know what? They're right.
I agree.
We have in our effort as parents to make sure they have the best life they could possibly have and a better life than we've had, and all the best things in life, and all the access to all the best coaches and pros and teachers and tutors and all these things that we wish we had.
Right.
We've created the anxiety that exists within our kids.
The worry. I mean, anxiety really comes from not being present. And it comes from worry about the future or the past, which is exacerbated. I mean, if you have, like you're saying, so much on your plate, you can't think. I mean, I used to come home from school and just, I don't know, I did my homework and I played tennis, but it wasn't, the level of intensity wasn't the same.
It wasn't the same.
Did you grow up in a small town, or did you grow up in a...
We moved around a lot.
So it wasn't a matter of size of town. It was
I grew up in Canada. We moved, most of the major cities, a lot of the major cities, we moved around a lot. But it was like, it was my gosh, the world was just different. Mm-hmm. Right?
It was different.
And that's before you add in access to a cell phone where they can research stuff that's absolutely crazy, right? I mean, when you look back and say accepting responsibility for what happened, is that I gave Ryan a cell phone at 12 years of age. And I said, you can go anywhere in the world you want with that. So I didn't say it knowingly say it. But what I did say is, here is access to the entire world in the cell phone. Mm-hmm. You can go research anything you want to research, figure out anything you want to figure out, go anywhere in the world you want. And by the way, you can do it in the middle of the night because I won't be watching, because I never did. And anything you want to know is there. And guess what? There's a lot of scary stuff on the World Wide Web.
Totally.
And porn is not a good thing, but it's not the worst thing on the web, because Ryan researched how to kill himself on the web.
Did you know that the more people watch news or listen to news, it was on my board exams, it will make you think too, right, that the world is worse. And in a way, I do think now in that circumstance, I do think being able to research it, that's different from what we're talking about, you and I talking about suicide, versus you're talking about, where someone's on the internet who's researching ways to kill themselves, right? And then somebody's out there actually disseminating that information. I think that's different than the thought of that.
It's different than the thought, but if you have the thought and then you have access to figure out your plan.
Right.
Because they always say, like, if someone is, I mean, you would know this better than I do, but if someone's is struggling, one of the first questions you should ask them is, have you thought about hurting yourself? If you're worried about it, you should ask them, have you thought about hurting yourself?
Right.
Have you thought about suicide? And a lot of times they will tell you.
It's true.
Right? And the next question you're supposed to ask is, do you have a plan?
Right. So what we're talking about is, and Jay's talking about, is like there's kind of three things to assess for. And you don't need to be a psychologist to assess for it. You can be a mini psychologist. You know what I mean? And you can learn. So there's plan, intention, and ideation. Plan. So the first one we were just talking about in the beginning is ideation. That means the thoughts. Then you want to assess like how often the thoughts are happening. Is it like every day? Is it every minute? Is it every hour? Is it once a week? Is it once a year? You know what I mean? Find the frequency out. The intention would mean like, I am definitely going to do this. And it's not just definitely. The plan would be like very definitive. Like on Tuesday night at 6 o'clock, I'm going to be driving off the road on the San Marcos Pass. That is like that you've reached your critical level there, where you really do need to contact somebody to help intervene, because that person could act on that. Yep. But I think what you were talking...
Well, I would say is my son at 13 used the internet to create his plan.
Yeah, because you looked through his history and
no,
you saw...
Well, no, because he deleted his history in his phone, because he wrote it out in his letter to me.
That he researched the ways to do it, and then... Yeah. How did that impact you? I mean, you don't have to tell me if you don't want
How did it impact me?
To read that. I mean, because you're talking about how you gave your son this phone. You know what I mean? And it's like so innocent. I've done it myself.
Well, and that's where, that's why I do what I do, right?
Do you think do you think the 12-year-old should have phones?
So what do I think on that? I think this, and I probably have an opinion that maybe not everybody's going to agree with, and that's fine. But to do it all over again, I would not give a 12-year-old kid a phone. Now, let me say, I would give you a phone. A phone that had the ability to call your parents and your friends, text your parents and your friends, and take pictures.
Is there? I don't know if there's a phone that does
There's
that.
apps that'll block all the stuff and make sure that it's all.
Oh, what's the app called?
There's a whole bunch of them. There's parent tracking.
That block all that stuff. Interesting.
But the reason I would do that is because I do not think a child of 12 or 13 or 14 years of age needs unfettered access to the internet.
I agree. Yeah.
I mean, they just don't need it. Like there's a computer in the house that they can go and they can do stuff and you can watch them. That's great. Their phone under the sheets at night, like Ryan would do. No, it's a bad idea. Right? And I don't think kids need, and Ryan wasn't a big Instagram or Facebook person, but in my movie that I talk to these kids, they'll tell you that Instagram is not something they felt was a good thing for their mental health. Facebook is not a great thing.
No, I agree completely. The best use of a phone for that age group is phone calls, texting, and really, like you're saying, because the internet can lead you astray.
Yeah.
You can click on one thing that might be totally innocent, and then it can go to something else that's like very random and weird.
And I'll make a statement that a lot of people may not agree with, but we would never let a child of 14 years of age drive a car, but we give them the access to the world on this phone.
To driving the phone.
They could be just as bad. Maybe they're not going to hurt others, but they can hurt themselves.
So that's one of the things you feel very strongly about.
I do, and I think that's I think that parents are going to make their own decisions, but it's
kind of simple though, too.
Yeah, but parents these days are different, right? My parents didn't care what other parents thought, right? They're going to make a decision, and they would look you in the eye and say, "I don't care what you
I think that's really healthy. That's kind of how I am.
Yeah, but not a lot of.
Well, we live in a conformist society. That's part of the problem with the suicide discussion. Everybody's conforming, and they feel like that. Okay, we can't all talk about it. You know what I mean? Everybody chunks themselves together. It's kind of the same idea.
Well, a lot of younger parents these days, I'll talk to them. Well, I say, well, what's your friend's parents get? Like, well, all these kids are getting cell phone, and they'll call each other up and go, well, did you give your kid a cell phone? This idea we make decisions as parents based on what we think is right, as opposed to let's gather all these other parents' opinions.
It's true. We've gotten very
It's like,
I wonder why that happened. I don't know. That's a good point.
My parents would have laughed. They're like, I don't care what you're all doing. This is the right thing. I don't
Exactly.
care.
My parents still like that. They're just, I think that is a good idea to just remind ourselves to each. Even if you're not a parent, I just think the idea of making your own decisions. Of course, get input, but it doesn't have to be based on a conglomerate of people.
I've been speaking in groups where parents have stood up and said, but you don't understand how hard it is because all their friends have phones. And all the other parents gave their friends phones. So I feel like I have to. It's like, you don't have to do anything.
Exactly. You can do whatever you want to do.
You do what you think is the right thing for your kid.
Yep. It's just a matter of that relationship. Yeah. You can make it your own, and you should make it your own, because I think that's healthy. I was wondering, Jason, why do you think reducing mental health stigma is so essential?
Well, if we don't talk about it, if these kids don't have an outlet to talk, if you believe some of the stats that, upwards of 40% of kids have high anxiety, 27% have had thoughts of suicide in the last year. If you believe those stats, and I didn't make them up, you can look them up on the internet, but and the right internet, not the wrong internet, but you can look them up, they're real stats. If you believe that, then 1 in every 3 kids is walking around with a secret, and they're not talking about it. And that secret may pop up one day and rear its ugly head because they don't know how to deal with it.
I kind of feel like schools could also have just some basic questionnaire, just to assess on a very simple level.
Schools, teachers, our doctors.
Totally. That's another.
Our doctors. Look at
Well, everybody just hands out pills. That's the problem is, I deal with a lot of different, and I'm not putting down physicians because I do respect them and work with them. And I think we need physicians. I just think that it's gotten out of control, this whole thing about people come in with a mental health issue, and the first thing is, here, take a pill. It's okay. If you need a pill, take the pill if you can't function. At the same time, check into what's actually going on, too. You know what I mean? Investigate and, have a discussion.
Well, but a lot of GPs, if you talk to them, and I'm sure you do, they're like, you send your kids in for their yearly checkup.
They don't know what to do.
Their mental health is not on that checkup list. Some of them are.
It's
are not.
changing. Actually, did you know the American Pediatric Association has actually in there, you could look it up, but they do have a curriculum where they require pediatricians to be train more in mental health. But I agree completely.
It doesn't mean they're going to
do it.
It doesn't mean that your kids are getting checked up on by your doctor.
No, they're
It doesn't
not.
mean we're getting checked up on by our doctors.
No, I mean, actually, there's just certain doctors that ask that. You know what I mean?
There's certain doctors who are progressive enough to go, I'm going to do this because it's the right thing.
Exactly.
But some of them don't want to know the answer because they go, okay, now what do I do? Because I don't know who to refer to.
That's exactly what I was just going to say next is that, sometimes I'll get a call. It could be a dentist. It could be an OBGYN. It doesn't matter. And they have someone in their waiting room. They don't know what to do. And so it's true. We do need to go train our physicians. The thing is, I think that comes back to the idea of stigma, because even in physicians have mental health issues going on and they don't seek help. It's just like a part of that culture of that profession.
Yeah. Well, I mean, imagine a world where you're at school and two kids took 2 days off. One kid comes in and goes, they go, hey, where were you? Oh, I had the flu. I stayed home. Okay, cool. Where were you? I just needed 2 days.
I know it's true. I used to give my son mental health days,
Yeah.
and he would say, "A mental health day? Why did he get that?" And I'd say, "Because he needed a break."
He needed a break, and it's okay. And we all look at it and go, "Hey, good for you."
But in junior high, wow, to take a mental health day now, he's in junior high. It's pretty like he took one day because my dad's getting older, and we wanted to go visit him, and it's like he had to get all this homework to get. I mean, it's really stressful just to take one day off for junior hires.
Yeah, and I used to miss like a third of the year because I was a sickly kid, and I don't remember ever doing homework because I missed a day. Now, my grades were not great. I'll give you that.
I know, but you turned out fine. It's true. There's something very defunct. I really do think we need to revamp our different medicine, education.
But and the challenge though is that you talk about the school should do this, the doctors should do this, the government should do this.
We should all do it. It should be a unified effort.
Absolutely, but by the time it all happens, so you have a 10-year-old kid at home right now, and they're going to go through the next 8 years, 10 years of growing up with a bunch of anxiety. If you're waiting for the schools or the government or your doctors to change the way things work around here
right,
to save your kid?
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. No, yeah. I'm just talking about what's going on, but you're absolutely correct, and that comes back to the idea of what, you're really, and I'm agreeing with you, the idea of if you're a parent or, you're involved with kids, I think it's important to take that on yourself. Well,
and I threw this concept out that I want to end teen suicide by the year 2030, and some people in the mental health, some mental health professionals look at me and go, Jay, why would you can't say that, because that's not possible.
I think that's very possible.
I'm like, it's certainly possible.
I'm going to hold that intention possible.
I mean, it's possible because 30 years ago, it wasn't that way.
I know, and you said you have talked to parents around the world. Do you think suicide's only happening more in the U.S. for teens?
A country-by-country basis, and I can't give you all the stats, but I can tell you that parents all around the world are scared about it, right? Because this anxiety levels are not just high in the States. They're high in a lot of different places.
Well, I mean, actually, the statistics I found from May 2018, JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association Psychiatry, article, they put out some good articles, actually. It supports the need for early intervention service to reduce suicide rates. I actually got about a year ago, I got all the statistics for Santa Barbara County, because no one was talking about suicide here, and I wanted to know what the facts were. And in Santa Barbara County in 2017, we lost 61 lives. And as of July of 2018, this is a little bit outdated, we had lost 28 lives. I know it got up past 61 lives. And I always think we should honor also those whose lives we have lost. Like, we need more memorials and, you know what I mean? Think ways to honor those lives that have been lost. But in Santa Barbara, actually, there were 7 suicides for 20 years old and under. There were 20 suicides for 20 to 40-year-olds. 40 to 60-year-olds, there were 30 suicides, and 60 years and older, 26 suicides. Now, of course, every year that changes. But I think really the point of us talking about this, too, is to move away from rejection and increase, mental health services so that we can improve our health.
Well, and the unfortunate numbers, the CDC reports that in 2017, across youth suicide was around 5,000 kids.
Right.
In 18, it was 5,700 kids.
So it's just going up, yeah.
And then the early indications that I've heard on 2019 is it'll be higher.
Well, I think suicide is the second leading cause of death globally. So
it was
and
for
especially
teens.
for teens.
For teens, it is. Yeah.
Well, I think, and it's also Caucasian teens, maybe, right? Is it?
Well, I think it's all teens.
Is it all teens?
Yeah.
Okay, because I remember it used to be.
There are
more,
different rates but yes.
What do you think that your work that you've been doing in the last 18 months for Ryan and for teen suicide has taught you about the attitudes that people hold toward mental health? Just in your experience talking to people.
I would say that there's an awareness that's kind of awakening.
So you think people are becoming more open to that?
I think they're becoming a lot more open to it. I think that parents are scared. They're seeing it. They don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for answers. And it's really hard when you talk to a parent whose child is in that state and has openly said that they want to hurt themselves.
Yep. And
maybe tried. And they're looking for resources. They're looking for help. And it's hard.
I have even 4-year-olds that talk about that. I mean, it even goes younger than teen. But it's important to reach out and get the help. And don't be afraid. You're not, if you're listening and you have a child or you have someone that has, like we're talking about a teenager or a child or anybody that you love that has suicidal thoughts or feelings, don't be afraid to talk about suicide. Talking about suicide does not make a person more suicidal, and it actually may diminish that person's desire to proceed with the suicide. And remember, we talked about the 3 pieces of information to ask, which is like plan, intent, and ideation. Yep. How do you think the teen suicide movement accepts or rejects mental health stigma? Do they talk? When you're around people in that same group of people, do they talk about mental health stigma? Or
I think that everybody's trying to talk about it. All right, I do believe that. I think, like I said, there's a lot of great people trying to make a difference.
Right.
There's still a lot of parents who, well, not my kid. I'm sure it's fine. Right. We as parents don't want to believe that might be our kid.
I know, but you know what? Actually, in preparation for today, like I said, I asked my son today. You could ask your kid today or ask someone you love today. Don't be afraid. And I know we've been taught, especially in America, to not feel uncomfortable. To not push ourselves because it's like, oh, I don't want to feel that. Yeah. But sometimes actually out of something uncomfortable can come something really meaningful, and it can help you grow closer to yourself and other people. So I think we'll just keep reinforcing the idea about talking.
Yeah.
And what can you do about suicidal thoughts? I think there's some really crucial steps that you can take to help save someone's life. I think isolation is one of the most important. This is actually from a newspaper clip I wrote. I just took some pieces.
Sure.
But isolation, I didn't know that piece that that you were talking about with Ryan. We were talking earlier, Jason was talking about how Ryan had become increasingly more isolated in his room, and then also with the addition of the phone and access to the internet, which we're both agreeing on that, kids, it's a little too young to have that much access because, if you want to make a phone call, it's okay. But if a person has become withdrawn or they're not involved in their usual activities, check in with them and don't give up after one time, because it may take more than one attempt to help the person connect enough to realize that there are people who care about them, right, and want to help them. How do you think, Jason, a person receiving support regarding teen suicide could help a person through a mental health crisis?
Well, I think so. I'm going to speak specifically with parents of teens because that's my message in my space that I'm really
sure,
because I think you need to narrow your message. I need to narrow my message down.
That's fine,
right?
yeah.
And so I'll get parents asking it's the same answer I got. I'd walk into Ryan's room and say, "How are you?" "I'm fine."
Right.
And I'm like, "Okay, good, you're fine." And the easy thing to do for us as parents is to say, "Well, they said they were fine, and my life's not fine. I got all this pressure going on. I'm going to go back to my life. I did my job. I checked in. They're fine."
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see in the movie where kids are saying, like, when I asked them, like, so when you ask your parents, said you're fine, well, what do you wish they did?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Good
I wish
question.
they didn't take fine as an answer because I wasn't fine.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say I was great. I didn't say I was good. I said I was fine.
It's another thing that we've taught our culture, like, to do that, to be like, everything's fine, it's all good, it's okay, don't make a big deal out of it, don't make mountains out, you know what I mean? So there's always that conversation, I think, when you're talking about, so don't be too hard on yourself, because I think that piece. We're taught that. Like, you check in with someone, they say they're fine.
But when you think about it, all of the array of ways you can answer a question.
Right.
So when I ask you, how are you? There's great, I'm amazing, I'm good. Mm-hmm. I'm horrible, I'm crappy, the world's falling apart, I'm fine. Fine's right in the middle that says I'm not great or good, but I'm not.
It's kind of meaningless. Yeah, it doesn't say a lot. Yeah.
But it really means a lot. It means you're not great. Mm-hmm. It means something's going on.
In all honesty, I think even like my son will say good, and I'm always reminding him, can you use more adjectives, because I like to know. And so now we check in. I think a really good thing, healthy thing to do with kids that I teach my the parents I see, is to ask 4 questions, and it will help you kind of get to some sort of place with them, which, because I think, for you and I, we may genuinely answer, how are you doing? But maybe we won't. Because even if we're Trader Joe's, we do that. Like, how are you doing? Good. You know what I mean? Actually, nowadays when I go to Trader Joe's, I'm like, I'm a little tired today. I try to be a little more genuine. But you could ask, what was your favorite part of your day? What was your least favorite part of your day? Who was the nicest to you? And who was the not nicest to you?
Those are great questions.
Thank you. Well, those usually elicit some kind of response.
You got to start a conversation.
Right, and those are good conversation. Just over time, I use those, and I think that so.
But I think there's also, it's the when do you start the conversation? I mean, how does that all work? Because
as early as possible.
But also, sure, absolutely, as early as possible. Like, what I'm getting at is that we walk into our kids' room, which is their sanctuary, where they want to be left alone. They're teenagers. We're invading their space. Say, "How was your day?"
Right,
I'm fine. Get out of my room,
You have to create
please.
a space. That's true.
You got to you do it where you've got to figure out where your kids are most willing to talk to you. Is it on the drive home?
I was going to say, I think
school?
Yeah, I think a car is a good place because it's like you're not, distracted too much.
But every kid's different, right? Maybe it's taking them for a walk. Where are they most comfortable with you?
I think you could
talk?
just ask your child because, actually, like you said, I agree completely. Everybody's different. Hey, but give them a couple options. If you just say, hey, can we talk? Where would you like to talk? They'll say, I don't know. Say, do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to go get a smoothie? Do you want to just could we just talk on the way home from school? You know what I mean? Throw out a couple ideas because sometimes they're not. And also, people don't realize that our brain goes through 2 huge transformations called neuronal pruning. And it happens at birth where we have this huge neuronal burst. And it happens one other time, and that's when people are teenagers. Mm-hmm. And then they all pair back. But, our frontal lobe isn't even fully developed till the time we're 12.
Yeah.
So it takes a while for the thought process. I always tell parents this, too, is that, if you ask a child a question, their neural networks aren't going to go as fast as ours. It might take them a little longer to really digest that question even. But I agree with you. You have to kind of probe a little bit more.
Well, and here's the next piece of this is that, especially this is a lot with dads, right? Because we are I'm completely... This is what I did. I fixed stuff.
Right, that's true.
Right?
Well, that's what men are taught to do.
So when you think about what I spend my day doing, I'm a CEO. I coach CEOs. People come to me with problems. They expect me to fix them. Mm-hmm. They want me to tell them what to do to get out of their problem. Mm-hmm. So I spend my days fixing other people's problems. It's what I do. If there's a hammer, if there's a nail, I'm a hammer. I fix it. That's what I do. Mm-hmm. So as dads specifically, our kids will come to us with, "Hey, I had a really crappy day today because this kid was being mean to me, and then this didn't work out, and that didn't work out, and then oh my God, what do? We say, oh, dude, when I was your age, do you know how wonderful your life is compared to my life? Do you know what are you complaining about? This is crazy. That kid, whatever. Let me tell you about this and this. I mean, this is bull BS.
I know,
why
we
are
have
you
to
doing
change that conversation.
So the minute you try to fix them, if you take someone who is upset, who has anxiety, and they come to you and they finally all the energy, everything it took for them to actually reach out and have that conversation, the courage it took for them to finally come to you and say, "I'm not right," and when you try to fix them, they'll never do it again.
It's true.
Right? They shut down.
I know. I'm always trying to counteract my husband. I love my husband, but it's like he's been totally ingrained in that. Like, everything's good. It's fine. It's good. And it is good. It's all the way it's meant to be. But we could have a conversation, too. It's not a put down. I just think we need to change our language.
No, as dads, as husbands, we need to change.
And I do educate my son, just as man descent, just male species, that, maybe dad grew up in a different era. And that's what, like you just said, that's what people did. So it makes sense to him too. But also, I think persistency is really critical, not giving up. And so if it doesn't work one day, try the next day.
Yeah, but we've got to. So, I mean, when you carry that thought process through, though, we, as dads, we are who we are, right? So I showed up every day as the guy who's on top of stuff, could fix everything, never had a problem. Don't worry about it. I've got it, because I wanted my wife and kids to feel safe. I got everything. Don't worry about it. There are no problems in my life. There were lots of problems in my life.
There's always problems.
But my wife and kids never knew about any of them, right? So this is how I showed up at home, as the guy who's got his act together. So how did Ryan show up? He emulated me.
Trying to be the guy
I
with
was his role model. Mm-hmm. He goes, well, Dad's got no problems. I should have no problems.
Right.
So he didn't tell me his problems.
And that's why I think it is really healthy to talk about what's going on. And, it doesn't have to disclose every little detail, but, just give some.
No, but if you give your kids the impression that life is always rosy and great for you, they'll go, what's wrong with me? Because my life's not rosy and great.
Exactly.
But my dad's is. It must be something wrong with me.
Well, and I know people come in, my office, and they'll say, oh, I need you to fix me, like I'm broken. And, what I tell people is, I can't fix you. Mm-hmm. I can teach you to react or respond more skillfully. Mm-hmm. But I think, you can, like you said, you can fix if you need to hammer a nail in, or, you want to fix dinner, but, or maybe your career, you know what I mean? Maybe that worked for you. Like that is your modus operandi. But I think in interpersonal stuff, we have to be, I think work is interpersonal too.
Sure.
But I just think, the idea of, maybe what you're talking about is like deciphering, like, okay, this is my work me, this is my home me, and this is the personification or the persona I put off to the people around me. And is this how I want to be, in the world?
Yeah, and for any of the dads that might be listening, go, well, I don't want to be that guy who shares everything. It's like, I get it. And I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to be a little more vulnerable and a little honest with your kids that you know what, let them know it's okay. That
exactly.
You had those moments in your life where maybe you felt the same way. Mm-hmm. That you didn't feel like you fit in. You didn't feel like you were loved. You did all those feelings that they have. We all had.
Exactly. We all have.
We have, and we still have. You're right.
Exactly. And if you're just joining us, we're kind of we have a couple more minutes, but we're here talking with Jay Reid. And before we do finish, I do want to make sure to just expand on. I know that you have some TED Talks. If you're more interested in learning about conversations with your kids about teen suicide. And if you live in Santa Barbara, we have the Santa Barbara Film Festival going on. And the world premiere, is it the world premiere?
It's Friday morning at 10 a.m., and you'd have to go onto the website to figure out exactly what theater it's at. But the Santa Barbara Film Festival website will show us at 10 a.m. on Friday morning, which I'm sure a lot of people are working. But the great thing is they're doing another showing at 2 p.m. on Saturday.
And they're all free to the public?
On Saturday, it's free to the public. They don't usually do this.
Which is nice.
In fact, Friday, you actually have to have a pass to come.
Nice.
Or buy a ticket. And you can, by the way, if you want to come Friday, they'll open up ticket sales just 10 minutes before the theater is open. So if your Friday works for you, great. But Saturday is free, and it's at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. You can go on the site and figure out exactly where it is.
And the movie is called, it's Ryan's story, and it's called Tell My Story. And we're here honoring Jason's son, Ryan, about teen suicide. I was wondering, maybe we have time for just one more question or two.
Well, can I tell you how I named the movie?
Sure, absolutely.
So, a couple of weeks after he passed, you tend to go through the room. You're looking for something, right? Looking for maybe you hit a notebook somewhere. Something, some clues. Mm-hmm. So I opened up the top drawer of his dresser, and there were 2 notes. One said, here's my username and passwords. And the other one said, tell my story.
We're telling a story. You're telling a story.
And so what I'm doing is telling the story, not so much of just Ryan, but of kids like Ryan.
It's got good
It's about your kids and what your kids are thinking now and how you can change as a parent, maybe change if you have to.
You think Ryan wanted
wanted me to tell the story for kids, for parents. I know that's what he wanted me to do.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm doing it.
So you immediately jumped on that, and that's how you got inspired to make the movie.
Yeah.
And thank you for making the movie. And
Thank you.
I'm hoping, I mean, wouldn't it be great if we showed that kind of a movie in schools? You know what I mean? Your movie in schools. And,
Yeah,
and
I think,
people.
I mean, I can tell you that this movie is for parents. I made this for parents to better understand what I didn't understand.
It's a great gift. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
It takes a lot of courage, you know?
Thanks.
When we live in a world where we're taught to kind of, like you were talking about, like with, we were talking earlier about, you know, if you have an iPhone and they have an iPhone, everybody needs an iPhone. But sometimes we have to do what, you know what I mean, stand up and speak out. And so this is a good opportunity for that, too, to have something come out of it to change.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. And I know Jason's goal is to eliminate suicide by 2030.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. I mean, when you think about when Mothers Against Drunk Driving came out and Students Against Drunk Driving, they didn't say, hey, let's raise awareness about drunk driving. They said, let's end it. And let's really and so did they achieve that? Has it ended? No, but because they came out with a mission to try and end it, they cut it down by 70% over like a 7-year period. But if they said, hey, let's go reduce the stigma around drunk driving, we would not have lowered it to the level we did. We didn't try to, reduce the stigma around polio. We said we want to eradicate polio. So I think we're just, as really well-intentioned people, need to change their thought process around what we're trying to do.
Especially teens, because teens have their whole life.
We need to end teen suicide, and we can end it because it didn't exist at this level when I was growing up. There weren't 5,700 kids a year dying.
Exactly. We know that we could get back to that idea.
We can get back to that.
Well, I think mental health stigma really creates a wall that stops the conversation and the compassion. And so I think having compassionate conversations like we've had builds inclusiveness and teaches others what we've learned. And I think we can do this by starting to treat each one of us as equal and reducing discrimination. So let's create some conversations and a culture that are accepting of each person as we work toward prevention and eradication. Jason, I want to thank you for coming on this show. Do you have any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Go home and hug your kids.
Exactly.
And talk to them.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
And listen to them.
And take time to pause, right?
And don't try to fix them. Just listen to them. They just want to be loved.
Exactly. Well, I want to thank you so much, my special guest, Jason, for coming on today. If you have questions or you want to try to reach Jason, you're always welcome to find my Facebook page, The Dr. Deborah Show. I also just want to give a shout out to HopeNet of Carpinteria, which is a group of concerned citizens who provide education and resources to prevent suicide. And if you or someone you know needs help, there's a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week Santa Barbara Access Line, and that number is 1-888-868-1649. We're live at KCSB FM Santa Barbara, and we'll talk to you next week.